Wow, this has been this has been a tricky one. We've asked a lot of you, our viewers tonight, joining us because it's going to be a long one. We've got this half-hour pre-show, and then, of course, at 7 p.m. we roll the most dangerous broadcast in the history of humankind, the broadcast that panicked the world, so they say. War of the Worlds is playing at 7. And we're glad to have you with us. I'm just checking out the chat. Please, by all means, feel free to have fun in the chat. We're going to be having fun along with you. And when I say we, I mean me and my special guest, Mike Sauter. We should get this show started.
Mr. Webber's Web, oh mystery. Ah. Mr. Webber's Web, oh mystery. Oh, oh, oh. Mr. Webber's Web, oh mystery. Ah. Mr. Webber's Web, oh
all right,
mystery.
let's not shilly-shally too much because there's a lot of ground to cover. Maybe you've heard some of the things that we're discussing tonight. Maybe there's some things that we're not noticing. Oh my gosh.
Mr. Webber's Web.
All right, let's just stop with that for now. Oh man. My computer is really acting up. So I want to apologize right up front. Also, I want to apologize for fans of Spider Hat. There's Spider Hat. So Spider Hat has made his appearance. There we go. Oh. But I kind of want to keep it classic because we got a guest tonight, and he's a very good friend of mine. Somebody with whom I went to college, and some people in the in the comments, especially Raphael, like to point out how many Ithaca College graduates they get to meet on my show. I can't help it. I went to school with some awesome people. Here's one right now. Ladies and gentlemen, have you met my good friend, Mike Sauter?
Why, hello.
Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, great to be here, caught in the web. And hey, you know what? Spider Hat is fine with me. I have to say, I am having like some crazy hair thing going on because my wife and I were passing out trick-or-treating candy earlier, and we were wearing Wayne and Garth outfits, so doing the Wayne's World thing. So I had a black mullet wig that I was wearing, and it you know, I was quite the fright after it was done. I think we made a strategic mistake in handing out bok choy to all the neighborhood kids. It just didn't go as well as planned.
I'm just picturing the kids like people at Costco walking around with little plates, like
fun size bok choy. That's right.
I love the idea of bok choy. I also love the idea of having you on the show, Mike, because you are one of the better researchers I know. And based on my broadcast last year of War of the Worlds, and it was a lot of fun. It was a different show back then. It wasn't the Web of Mystery. I'm sorry, I said of Web O Mystery. It was the Captain John's Haunted Radio from Space. Even longer than this title, but it had some bumps. It had some bumps and grinds. We were using a video that I had made that I had not quite mixed as well as I needed to. We'll be watching a video off of YouTube tonight. Other people do a much better job making videos than I do. I'm really good at shows. Oh, hey, check it out. Let's see. John Atkinson says, did any of the Ithaca folks ever go to the bar Ruloff's?
Ruloff's in College Town. I believe there was somebody's brain on display in it. And I just found out recently that I believe it's no longer there.
Interesting.
Sadly, everything is turning into high rises for, student housing in Ithaca.
And we should also, say that like Ithaca College, our college town was Ithaca. But if you went to Cornell, which was a much nicer school, not really for where we would have gone, but it's a fancy schmancy school. But they had their own town called College Town. And I would go up there
Well,
occasionally for pizza, I think.
to be fair, I mean, it was a neighborhood. It wasn't its own town. It was just a neighborhood that had town in the name of it.
Mike, let's talk about what everyone knows. Let's just start there. What everybody knows about the War of the Worlds broadcast. It happened on October 30th, actually. So we're a year and a day, or I'm sorry, we're how many years? It was 86 years ago?
86. Yes.
Yeah. So in 1938, it aired on the night of October 30th. Any details? I could throw a couple in if you like.
Well, I mean, it's important. I mean, the broad strokes, that the things that most people have heard about it, even if they have never actually heard the broadcast or just clips from it, is that it was an adaptation of the H.G. Wells novel, War of the Worlds. Martians invade, and it was portrayed in a manner that made people feel like they were listening to an actual news broadcast, and people all across the country panicked. But the question we're going to delve into, but we'll save that for the after we listen to the actual broadcast, is did they really panic? Because there's some debate about how much the myth is actually true. So we will get to that. But that's kind of the baseline. Orson Welles, of course, is intimately associated with it, with the broadcast, although obviously there's a whole backstory to him and the show that I think, John, you have some plentiful details about.
I am the old time radio geek out of all of our friends. I love old time radio shows so much. Have since I was a little kid, and this was always something that I was told: the Great Panic of 1938. And I remember there was a made-for-TV movie like in 74 or 75. I think it was on ABC, actually, about this. And they fictionalized it. I think Howard Koch wrote it. He was
I
in
don't
some
recall that
way.
he wrote it. I'm pretty sure that Tom Bosley was in it. And, back, it was in the Happy Days era. So, of course, he was well known to a lot of us who learned a lot about, or thought we learned a lot about the broadcast from that TV movie. The Night That Panicked America was the name of it.
That's
And
right.
it was really enjoyable. But it was actually the second time, though, the War of the Worlds broadcast was dramatized, because there was a live TV era dramatization of behind the scenes of that broadcast as well.
Absolutely. And there was oh, that's really cool. Yeah. Chris is sharing some great stuff here. Thank you, Chris. Ray Collins was a member of the Mercury Theater. He did 3 characters in this play. Ray Collins is best known as Lieutenant Tragg on the Perry Mason radio show, one of the greatest radio shows ever. I'll play it one of these days because, oh my gosh, it is such a fantastic show. There was the story that we grew up with. I always thought this. What do you think of this, Mike? I always thought that we were told this story about the Great Panic broadcast of 1938 in a cautionary way to describe the power of media, the power of what is said through media and how people take it seriously. And there was a very certain time that we were at in 1938. one of the things that's very notable about 1938 is, historically speaking, let's see, I'm flipping through some notes here. Superman made his first appearance in Action Comics #1 in the year 1938. That's okay. In March of 1938, Hitler had just annexed Austria. In September, the Munich Agreement was signed. So Americans were very aware of Hitler's aggression and that there was a possibility of war. The radio news was becoming increasingly important for war updates. And Mike, you were the one who told me this, that one of the things that was becoming quite common was that radio would break in. Radio would have these emergency break-ins on whatever you were listening to.
Yeah, it was the whole idea of interrupting the regular broadcast to give a special update to what was going on in the world. There was not only, I mean, obviously the big story happening in 1938 globally was Europe and the Nazis and what was happening there. But there was also other stories right before, some weeks before the War of the Worlds broadcast. There was a massive hurricane that struck New England, and hundreds of people died. So there was a lot happening at that time, and people were I don't want to say getting conditioned, but they were getting used to, they might be listening to their favorite soap opera or a quiz show or a comedy show, and all of a sudden somebody would break into the show and make an announcement, about interrupting the regular programming to bring you a special news bulletin. I found a CBS publication that they would give to advertisers. That every month they published some print thing just to kind of tout CBS as a place for advertisers to advertise on. And in this, they were talking about how specifically in September of 1938, how many world capitals that they had correspondence in, how many broadcasts they made from Europe and other places around the world. And they were touting their up-to-the-minute coverage that they would bring people on September 21st, 1938, into the early hours of September 22nd. In this document, CBS mentioned that they broke into their regularly scheduled programs with news bulletins at 6:50 a.m., 8:15 a.m., 11 a.m., 12:15 p.m., 2:25 p.m., 6 p.m., 11:10 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m., 1:15 a.m., and 2 a.m. So that shows not only how much this was happening and how listeners were getting used to hearing these special bulletins, news flashes, whatever, but also the importance of the news that was happening at that time. Even though it was about a year away from Germany invading Poland, which really was the kickoff to World War II, there was so much going on. I was just looking through some newspaper headlines from September and October of 1938. World warned to keep out of Nazis' way. Europe faces new war threats as peace conference collapses. Chamberlain pleads peace as Europe rushes to war. And these are all not like the little headlines on normal stories, but the classic banner, large headline going across all columns on the front page of the newspaper. So it not only was a lot of stuff happening, it was like big stuff happening. So yeah, there was everybody was on edge, and Orson Welles was somebody uniquely, I don't want to say qualified, but uniquely interested in playing around with the medium, as later he would do with Citizen Kane. He would try to explore what things haven't been done in this relatively young medium, and that's what War of the Worlds was trying to utilize these special bulletins to leverage that excitement, interest, and energy in a dramatic form.
The intensity of Orson Welles can be understood through this plain fact. He was 23 years old. He was a workhorse. His theater company, the Mercury Theater, was very highly regarded and discussed very favorably by, they were the toast of the town for quite a few years there in the 30s. They got a radio show, Mercury Theater of the Air. It was a sustaining radio show, which means they had no sponsor. And that is going to be a key element to what happened in the War of the Worlds broadcast. They never broke for commercial. And by not having those enforced breaks that a sponsor would require, there was a long stretch where they weren't warning anyone that they were listening to a fictional story that was made to sound like actual happening events. And let's have let's take a look at one of those events that very much shaped how an audience would perceive this show. I hit the wrong button. Of course I did. It's you would never believe I was in radio. I used to be able to perform and hit buttons at the same time. Oh my God, to have those abilities today. All right, here we go. The Hindenburg disaster, my friends. The Hindenburg disaster. This is a little clip. Herbert Morrison is the reporter. One of the characters in this War of the Worlds broadcast was based on him, played by the actor Frank Reddick. So let's listen to what actually happened, what people heard on the air. We're going to be watching a video, but remember, they're listening to it on the air. On radio, the very first live medium that any human being would ever have. And so this is what people were hearing.
It's starting to rain again. The rain had cracked up a little bit. The back motors of the ship are just holding it just enough to keep it from... It bursts into flames. Get it started. It's fighting and it's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh my, get out of the way, please. It's bursting into flames and it's falling on the mooring mast and all the folks between it. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's like 400 or 500 feet into the sky, and it's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. The smoke and the flames now, and the flame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the passengers screaming around it. I told you, I can't talk to people. There's friends around there. I can't talk, ladies and gentlemen. Honest, it's just laying down massive smoking wreckage. And everybody can't hardly breathe and talk and screaming. Lady, I'm sorry. Honestly, I can hardly breathe. I'm going to step inside while I cannot see it. Johnny, that's terrible. I can't.
Woo! We want to thank History Remastered for posting that. And wow, that kind of hits you hard. But if you can imagine being a person who grew up with just newspapers and maybe newsreels, but that's like when you go to the theater that you see those newspapers and magazines. The printed word was the major way you got your news. And then to suddenly be able to experience that and hear that, I don't imagine that most people heard it, because as Chris Regan brings up, you have to wonder how many people were really excited about a Zeppelin mooring in New Jersey to begin with. Not a lot of things went wrong like that. So how do you think this affected the listening public, Mike?
Well, obviously, the whole idea of the reporters painting in the script for the War of the Worlds, they use a word description or a word picture as a phrase for what the reporter on the scene is doing. Obviously, until television came along, they had to not only inform you but also conjure that image in your mind of what actually was happening, and to do that in a very uh, you know way that is difficult to actually achieve. But the people who were good at it were really amazing to kind of keep that conversation going, so you don't have dead air, even in a breaking news situation, but to be able to conjure that image. So yeah, that's something that they were trying to do with the broadcast for the War of the Worlds. That was the Hindenburg explosion was 1937, so it was still fresh
19.
in people's minds, just being the previous year, and having that on location element and doing it so well. I mean, that is really the linchpin, as the centerpiece, I think, for the whole War of the Worlds broadcast, leading up to the most dramatic 5.7 seconds of silence that has ever been in the history of broadcasting, in my opinion. Um, but you can hear, like, just trying to get that image in people's minds of not just that emotional reporter describing what he's seeing for the listeners at home, but those background elements in there that make it feel even more real. I think is something that's important to keep in mind when listening to the War of the Worlds broadcast. Something we might want to mention something about structure for the War of the Worlds is that the hour long presentation was kind of broken up into three parts. And it's really, the famous part is only the first 20 minutes, really. You could argue the first 40 minutes, but the first 20-ish minutes were that playing with the form, where you start to have the breaking into broadcasts, unrelated broadcast kind of a style to it. And then the middle 20 minutes are really just these short little vignettes with no actual characters, or hardly any characters that we're introduced to, of the Martians invading and humans trying to fight the Martians. And finally, the last 20 or so minutes, it just reverts back into a real kind of straightforward, more typical narrative that you would hear on the Mercury Theater, of just Orson Welles' character talking about what he's thinking and seeing and observing. And I was really, when I was preparing for talking about this, it really kind of occurred to me that there are pretty much only two characters in this story. You have the reporter and Professor Pearson that Orson Welles plays, and
Yeah.
everybody else is just in it sort of peripherally.
Yeah,
Kind of
it's
amazing.
yeah, you've got like sort of the cast of many souls that have their hands on an event, and that's really interesting. Here's another thing that Raphael is bringing up, and it's very true. Let's talk about the actual broadcast, because we're getting really close to 7. We're about 7 minutes away now. The broadcast happened on a Sunday night. This is October 30th, 1938. The most popular show on radio at the time wasn't exactly called the Charlie McCarthy Show at the time. What was it called, Mike? And please take it from there.
The Chase and Sanborn Hour. Many of the shows were named after their sponsor. As a matter of fact, after the hubbub with the War of the Worlds panic, they got a sponsor for the Mercury Theater, and I believe changed the name of the show for that. But
Yes.
the Chase and Sanborn Hour with Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy was the most popular, or one of the most popular shows on television. It was the first show to rank number 1 every month for 2 consecutive years.
Now that's
So
on radio, right?
on radio. And the broadcast up against the War of the Worlds, the Chase and Sanborn Hour on October 30th, 1938, in the Hooper ratings, the one of the ratings companies at that time, they gave it a 34.8 rating. So almost 35% of the radios were tuned to the Chase and Sanborn hour. So this is, it's like being some esoteric kind of artsy show being up against Seinfeld, in its heyday kind of a situation. So it's an interesting scenario to be up against, but we'll talk a little bit more after the broadcast about how that plays into the panic or didn't. Plays into the controversy over the panic, at least.
The other side of the coin to the success of the Chase and Sanborn hour, which is an hour long, and it's a big variety show. It's hosted by Don Amici. It has all kinds of acts, and one of the main acts, one of the feature acts, is Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, the ventriloquist act. And Raphael said it. I still don't get a ventriloquist on the radio. Mike, I've never asked you this. Why do you think ventriloquist on the radio worked? You know radio. How did that work?
It's just, it doesn't matter. I mean, I know the joke in the movie Radio Days from Woody Allen was, Julie Kavner yelling, one of her family members, like, why, how could he's not cheating? How do you know his lips aren't moving? But that's not really the point. I mean, it's just characterization. It's just that Charlie McCarthy is a character. He's doing the voice. And so there's plenty of shows where you'd have an comedy between two different voices. It just happened to be coming from the same person.
I mean, I have to agree, because I've seen lots and lots of videotape. I have to agree with Chris, who says Bergen was really just a puppeteer, not actually a ventriloquist. You can see his lips moving the whole time. But you're absolutely right. It's the characters. Mortimer Snurd was another character. Effie Clinker was another character based on puppets by Edgar Bergen. But Edgar Bergen was a very clever comedian. I don't think anything can be taken away from him. But let's talk about Orson Welles again. So Orson Welles has this great theater, and he's doing these groundbreaking productions of Shakespearean plays and traditional theater turned on its head with his very revolutionary group. Great producers, one of them John Houseman, who we would all know as kids from the Payne and Weber. They get money the old-fashioned way, they earn it. Or The Paper Chase, which was his famous movie. There's a lot of action around the Mercury Theater, and back in those days, they liked to put classy stuff on the air, and a theater group that's very celebrated in New York was a great idea. Unfortunately, they were not getting great ratings. So they really had to swing big. They really had to do something big. So I think that's a big factor to this. Is I've read a bit of what Howard Koch, the writer of the War of the Worlds script adaptation, had said, and how Wells kept kicking the script back to him over and over again and saying, no, it's not real enough. It's not scary enough. It's not urgent enough. You're too narrative. Give me more, give me more heat. Give me more action. And my proposal, I don't know if you agree with this, Mike, is I would say that the second half of the show that you rightly point out is very narrative, very much a radio show. I think that's a lot more of Koch's script. And I think the beginning was a lot more of Orson Welles turning it on its head, because that's what he liked to do. Does that sound
yeah,
possible?
No, for sure. And he Wells was never one to take the safe, easy route. He was always one to take the dangerous route from his early theater days with the Mercury Theater. I remember a story where he wanted it to be completely dark in the theater before the lights went up, just to evoke a mood. And when they were rehearsing it, he was so annoyed that there were actually emergency exit kind of lights on. And he said, kill those too. And they said, we can't, it's a law. And he said, I don't care. Kill those too. So that's Orson Welles. One thing that we should mention, and this comes into play when we get to the talk afterwards, is that some people, according to legend, tuned in late to the Mercury Theater broadcast that they
Yes.
started off watching the Chase and Sanborn hour. And when some of the songs came on, they were like, let's check, see what else is on, flip around the dial. So we'll try to send you some information as you're listening to the War of the Worlds broadcast about things happening in the actual War of the Worlds broadcast, but also what was going on the Chase and Sanborn hour opposite it.
It is time. We've hit 7 p.m. Let's get to the show. We will be talking in chat, and if you folks don't mind, yes, Mike and I will be putting things up, including your comments from the chat on the screen during the show, because I have a terrible attention span, and I always have to do something while I'm listening to radio shows. So here's what I'll be doing. And let us get to, now I'm trying to remember who we're getting this from, because they're really terrific. It's the Orson Welles Topic channel. Here, I'm going to throw them a subscribe, going to throw them a like. And this is remastered. That's the main reason why I wanted to use this one. Remastered audio. And here we go. The original 1938 radio broadcast of Orson Welles and Mercury Theater on the Air. This is their adaptation of H.G. Wells' famous invasion story, War of the Worlds.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. Near the end of October, business was better. The war scare was over. More men were back at work. Sales were picking up. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crosley service estimated that 32 million people were listening in on radios.
In the next 24 hours, not much change in temperature. A slight atmospheric disturbance of undetermined origin is reported over Nova Scotia, causing a low-pressure area to move down rather rapidly over the northeastern states, bringing a forecast of rain accompanied by winds of light gale force. Maximum temperature 66, minimum 48. This weather report comes to you from the Government Weather Bureau. We take you now to the Meridian Room in the Hotel Park Plaza in downtown New York, where you will be entertained by the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. From the Meridian Room in the Park Plaza Hotel in New York City, we bring you the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra. With a touch of the Spanish, Raymond Raquello leads off with La Comparsita.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity. Professor Pearson of the observatory at Princeton confirms Farrell's observation and describes the phenomenon as, quote, like a jet of blue flame shot from a gun, unquote. We now return you to the music of Ramon Raquello, playing for you in the Meridian Room of the Park Plaza Hotel, situated in downtown New York.
And now a tune that never loses favor, the ever-popular Stardust. Raymond Raquello and his orchestra.
Ladies and gentlemen, following on the news given in our bulletin a moment ago, the Government Meteorological Bureau has requested the large observatories of the country to keep an astronomical watch on any further disturbances occurring on the planet Mars. Due to the unusual nature of this occurrence, we have arranged an interview with a noted astronomer, Professor Pearson, who will give us his views on this event. In a few moments, we will take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton, New Jersey. We return you until then to the music of Ramon Raquello and his orchestra. We are ready now to take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton, where Carl Phillips, our commentator, will interview Professor Richard Pearson, famous astronomer. We take you now to Princeton, New Jersey.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Carl Phillips speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton. I'm standing in a large semicircular room, pitch black except for an oblong split in the ceiling. Through this opening, I can see a sprinkling of stars that cast a kind of frosty glow over the intricate mechanism of the huge telescope. The ticking sound you hear is the vibration of the clockwork. Professor Pearson stands directly above me on a small platform, peering through the giant lens. I ask you to be patient, ladies and gentlemen, during any delay that may arise during our interview. Besides the ceaseless watch of the heavens, Professor Pearson may be interrupted by telephone or other communications. During this period, he is in constant touch with the astronomical centers of the world. Professor, may I begin our questions?
At any time, Mr. Phillips.
Professor, would you please tell our radio audience exactly what you see as you observe the planet Mars through your telescope?
Nothing unusual at the moment, Mr. Phillips. A red disk swimming in the blue sea. Transverse stripes across the disk. Quite distinct now because Mars happens to be at the point nearest the Earth, in opposition, as we call it.
In your opinion, what do these transverse stripes signify, Professor Pearson?
Not canals, I can assure you, Mr. Phillips. Although that's the popular conjecture of those who imagine Mars to be inhabited. From a scientific viewpoint, the stripes are merely the result of atmospheric conditions peculiar to the planet.
Then you're quite convinced, as a scientist, that living intelligence as we know it does not exist on Mars?
I'd say the chances against it are 1,000 to 1.
And yet, how do you account for these gas eruptions occurring on the surface of the planet at regular intervals?
Phillips, I cannot account for it.
By the way, Professor, for the benefit of our listeners, how far is Mars from the Earth?
Approximately 40 million miles.
Well, that seems a safe enough distance. Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Someone has just handed Professor Pearson a message. While he reads it, let me remind you that we are speaking to you from the observatory in Princeton, New Jersey, where we are interviewing the world-famous astronomer, Professor Pearson. One moment, please. Professor Pearson has passed me a message which he has just received. Professor, may I read the message to the listening audience?
Certainly, Mr. Phillips.
Ladies and gentlemen, I shall read you a wire addressed to Professor Pearson from Dr. Gray of the Natural History Museum, New York. Quote, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Seismograph registered shock of almost earthquake intensity occurring within a radius of 20 miles of Princeton. Please investigate. Signed, Lloyd Gray, Chief of Astronomical Division. Unquote. Professor Pearson, could this occurrence possibly have something to do with the disturbances observed on the planet Mars?
Hardly, Mr. Phillips. This is probably a meteorite of unusual size, and its arrival at this particular time is merely a coincidence. However, we shall conduct a search as soon as daylight permits.
Thank you, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 10 minutes, we've been speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton, bringing you a special interview with Professor Pearson, noted astronomer. This is Carl Phillips speaking. We are returning you now to our New York studio.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the latest bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. Toronto, Canada. Professor Morse of Macmillan University reports observing a total of 3 explosions on the planet Mars between the hours of 7:45 p.m. and 9:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This confirms earlier reports received from American observatories. Now, nearer home, comes a special bulletin from Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton. The flash in the sky was visible within a radius of several hundred miles, and the noise of the impact was heard as far north as Elizabeth. We have dispatched a special mobile unit to the scene, and we'll have our commentator, Carl Phillips, give you a word picture of the scene as soon as he can reach there from Princeton. In the meantime, we take you to the Hotel Martinet in Brooklyn, where Bobby Millett and his orchestra are offering a program of dance music. We take you now to Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Carl Phillips again, out at the Wilmot Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Professor Pearson and myself made the 11 miles from Princeton in 10 minutes. Well, I hardly know where to begin. To paint for you a word picture of the strange scene before my eyes, but something out of a modern Arabian Nights. Well, I just got here. I haven't had a chance to look around yet. I guess that's it. Yes, I guess that's the thing directly in front of me. Half buried in a vast pit. Must have struck with terrific force. The ground is covered with splinters of a tree. It must have struck on its way down. But I can see the object itself doesn't look very much like a meteor. At least not the meteors I've seen. It looks more like a huge cylinder. Has a diameter of, what would you say, Professor Pearson?
What's that?
What would you say? What's the diameter of this?
About 30 yards.
About 30 yards. The metal on the sheath is, well, I've never seen anything like it. The color is sort of yellowish white. Its curious spectators now are pressing close to the object in spite of the efforts of the police to keep them back, getting in front of my line of vision. Would you mind standing one side, please, while the police are pushing the crowd back? Here's Mr. Wilmot, owner of the farm here. He may have some interesting facts to add. Mr. Wilmot, would you please tell the radio audience as much as you remember of this rather unusual visitor that dropped in your backyard? Step closer, please. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Wilmot.
Well, I was listening to the radio.
Closer and louder, please.
Pardon me?
Louder, please, closer.
Yes. I was listening to the radio and kind of drowsing. That professor fellow was talking about Mars, so I was half chosen and half...
Yes, Mr. Wilmot, and then what happened?
Well, as I was saying, I was listening to the radio, kind of halfway.
Yes, Mr. Wilmot, and then you saw something.
Not first off. I heard something.
And what did you hear?
A hissing sound like this. Kind of like a 4th of July rocket.
Yes, then what?
I turned my head out the window and would have sworn I was asleep and dreaming.
Yes?
I seen a kind of greenish streak and then zingo. Something smacked the ground, knocked me clear out of my chair.
Well, were you frightened, Mr. Wilmot?
Well, I ain't quite sure. I reckon I was
kind of riled.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wilmot. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you want me to tell
No, that's
someone
quite all
else?
right. That's plenty. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard Mr. Wilmot, owner of the farm where this thing has fallen. I wish I could convey the atmosphere, the background of this fantastic scene. Hundreds of cars are parked in a field in back of us, and the police are trying to rope off the roadway leading into the farm, but it's no use. They're breaking right through. Cars' headlights throw an enormous spotlight on the pit where the object's half buried. Now, some of the more daring souls now are venturing near the edge. The silhouettes stand out against the metal sheen. One man wants to touch the thing. He's having an argument with the policeman. Now, the policeman wins. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's something I haven't mentioned in all this excitement, but it's becoming more distinct. Perhaps you've caught it already on your radio. Listen, please. Do you hear it? It's a curious humming sound that seems to come from inside the object. I'll move the microphone nearer. Here. Now, we're not more than 25 feet away. Can you hear it now? Professor Pearson,
Yes, Mr. Rowe.
can you tell us the meaning of that scraping noise inside the thing?
Possibly the unequal cooling of its surface.
I say, do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial. Not found on this Earth. Friction with the Earth's atmosphere usually tears holes in a meteorite. This thing is smooth, and you can see its cylindrical
Just a minute.
shape.
Something's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is terrific. This end of the thing is beginning to flake off. The top is beginning to rotate like a screw, and this thing must be hollow.
Move it! Keep back there! Keep back there! Hey, keep those men back! Keep back there! Keep those idiots back! He's off! The top's loose! Go, Bell! Stand back!
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone crawling someone or something. I can see coming out of that black hole two luminous discs. The eyes, it might be a face, might be almost. Good heavens, something wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now it's another one, and another one, and another one. They look like tentacles to me. Yeah, I can see the thing's body now. It's large as a bear. It glistens like wet leather, but face. Ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It's so awful. The eyes are black, and they gleam like a serpent. The mouth is a kind of V-shape with saliva dripping from its rimless lips that seem to quiver and pulsate. And the monster, or whatever it is, can hardly move. It seems weighed down by possibly gravity or something. The thing's rising up now, and the crowd falls back. There seems plenty. The most extraordinary experience, ladies and gentlemen. I can't find words. Well, I'll pull this microphone with me as I talk. I'll have to stop the description till I can take a new position. Hold on, will you please? I'll be right back in a minute.
We are bringing you an eyewitness account of what's happening on the Wilmuth Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. We now return you to Carl Phillips at Grover's Mill.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I on? Ladies and gentlemen, here I am, back of a stone wall that adjoins Mr. Wilmot's garden. From here, I get a sweep of the whole scene. I'll give you every detail as long as I can talk and as long as I can see. More state police have arrived. They're drawing up a cordon in front of the pit. About 30 of them. No need to push the crowd back now. They're willing to keep their distance. The captain conferring with someone. Can't quite see who. Oh, yes, I believe it's Professor Pearson. Yes, it is. Now they've parted, and the professor moves around one side, studying the object while the captain and two policemen advance with something in their hands. I can see it now. It's a white handkerchief tied to a pole. Flag of truce. If those preachers know what that means, what anything means. Wait a minute. Something's happening. Humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from that mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole
field's caught by the woods, the fires, the gas spreading everywhere. Coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However, we will return to that point at the earliest opportunity. In the meantime, we have a late bulletin from San Diego, California. Professor Indelkoffer, speaking at a dinner of the California Astronomical Society, expressed the opinion that the explosions on Mars are undoubtedly nothing more than severe volcanic disturbances on the surface of the planet. We continue now with our piano interlude.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been handed a message that came in from Grover's Mill by telephone. Just one moment, please. At least 40 people, including 6 state troopers, lie dead in a field east of the village of Grover's Mill. Their bodies burned and distorted beyond all possible recognition. The next voice you hear will be that of Brigadier General Montgomery Smith, commander of the state militia at Trenton, New Jersey.
I have been requested by the governor of New Jersey to place the counties of Mercer and Middlesex as far west as Princeton and east to Jamesburg under martial law. No one will be permitted to enter this area except by a special pass issued by state or military authorities. 4 companies of state militia are proceeding from Trenton to Grover's Mill and will aid in the evacuation of homes within the range of military operations. Thank you.
You have just been listening to General Montgomery Smith, commanding the state militia at Trenton. In the meantime, further details of the catastrophe at Grover's Mill are coming in. The strange creatures, after unleashing their deadly assault, crawled back in their pit and made no attempt to prevent the efforts of the firemen to recover the bodies and extinguish the fire. The combined fire departments of Mercer County are fighting the flames which menace the entire countryside. We have been unable to establish any contact with our mobile unit at Grover's Mill, but we hope to be able to return you there at the earliest possible moment. In the meantime, we take you to... Just one moment, please. Ladies and gentlemen, I have just been informed that we have finally established communication with an eyewitness of the tragedy. Professor Pearson has been located at a farmhouse near Grover's Mill, where he has established an emergency observation post. As a scientist, he will give you his explanation of the calamity. The next voice you hear will be that of Professor Pearson, brought to you by direct wire. Professor Pearson.
Of the creatures in the rocket cylinder at Grover's Mill, I can give you no authoritative information, either as to their nature, their origin, or their purposes here on Earth. Of their destructive instrument, I might venture some conjectural explanation. For want of a better term, I shall refer to the mysterious weapon as a heat ray. It's all too evident that these creatures have scientific knowledge far in advance of our own. It's my guess that in some way they are able to generate an intense heat in a chamber of practically absolute non-conductivity. This intense heat they project in a parallel beam against any object they choose by means of a polished parabolic mirror of unknown composition, much as the mirror of a lighthouse projects a beam of light. That is my conjecture of the origin of the heat ray.
Thank you, Professor Pearson. Ladies and gentlemen, here is a bulletin from Trenton. It is a brief statement informing us that the charred body of Carl Phillips has been identified in the Trenton Hospital. Now, here's another bulletin from Washington, D.C. The Office of the Director of the National Red Cross reports 10 units of Red Cross emergency workers have been assigned to the headquarters of the state militia, stationed outside of Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Here's a bulletin from State Police, Princeton Junction. The fires at Grover's Mill and vicinity are now under control. Scouts report all quiet in the pit, and there is no sign of life appearing from the mouth of the cylinder. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special statement from Mr. Harry McDonald, Vice President in charge of operations.
We have received a request from the state militia of Trenton to place at their disposal our entire broadcasting facilities. In view of the gravity of the situation, and believing that radio has a responsibility to serve in the public interest at all times, We are turning over our facilities to the state militia at Trenton.
We take you now to the field headquarters of the state militia near Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
This is Captain Lansing of the Signal Corps, attached to the state militia, now engaged in military operations in the vicinity of Grover's Mill. Situation arising from the reported presence of certain individuals of unidentified nature is now under complete control. The cylindrical object, which lies in a pit directly below our position, surrounded on all sides by 8 battalions of infantry, without heavy field pieces, but adequately armed with rifles and machine guns. All cause for alarm, if such cause ever existed, is now entirely unjustified. Things, whatever they are, do not even venture to poke their heads above the pit. I can see their hiding place plainly in the glare of the searchlights here. With all their reported resources, these creatures can scarcely stand up against heavy machine gun fire. Anyway, it's an interesting outing for the troops. I can make out their khaki uniforms crossing back and forth in front of the lights. Looks almost like a real war. There appears to be some slight smoke in the woods bordering the Millstone River, probably fire started by campers. Well, we ought to see some action soon. One of the companies is deploying on the left flank. A quick thrust and it'll all be over. Now, wait a minute. I see something on top of the cylinder. No, it's nothing but a shadow. Now the troops are on the edge of the Wilmot Farm. 7,000 armed men closing in on an old metal tube. A tub, rather. Well, wait, that wasn't a shadow. It's something moving. Solid metal, kind of a shield-like affair rising up out of the cylinder. Going higher and higher. What? It's standing on legs, actually rearing up on a sort of metal framework. Now it's reaching above the trees and the searchlights are on it. Hold on.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars. The battle which took place tonight at Grover Mills has ended in one of the most startling defeats ever suffered by an army in modern times. 7,000 men armed with rifles and machine guns pitted against a single fighting machine of the invaders from Mars. 120 known survivors. The rest strewn over the battle area from Grover's Mill to Plainsboro, crushed and trampled to death under the metal feet of the monster, or burned to cinders by its heat ray. The monster is now in control of the middle section of New Jersey and has effectively cut the state through its center. Communication lines are down from Pennsylvania to the Atlantic Ocean. Railroad tracks are torn and service from New York to Philadelphia discontinued, except routing some of the trains through Allerton and Phoenixville. Highways to the north, south, and west are clogged with frantic human traffic. Police and army reserves are unable to control the mad flight. By morning, the fugitives will have swelled Philadelphia, Camden, and Trenton, it is estimated, to twice their normal population. Martial law prevails throughout New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. At this time, we take you to Washington for a special broadcast on the national emergency. The Secretary of the Interior.
Citizens of the nation, I shall not try to conceal the gravity of the situation that confronts the country, nor the concern of your government in protecting the lives and property of its people. However, I wish to impress upon you, private citizens and public officials, all of you, the urgent need of calm and resourceful action. Fortunately, this formidable enemy is still confined to a comparatively small area, and we may place our faith in the military forces to keep them there. In the meantime, placing our faith in God, we must continue the performance of our duties, each and every one of us, so that we may confront this destructive adversary with a nation united, courageous, and consecrated to the preservation of human supremacy on this earth. I thank you.
You have just heard the Secretary of the Interior speaking from Washington. Bulletins too numerous to read are piling up in the studio here. We're informed that the central portion of New Jersey is blacked out from radio communication due to the effect of the heat ray upon power lines and electrical equipment. Here's a special bulletin, New York.
Cables have been received from English, French, and German scientific bodies offering assistance. Astronomers report continued gas outbursts at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The majority voiced the opinion that the enemy will be reinforced by additional rocket machines. There have been several attempts made to locate Professor Pearson of Princeton, who has observed Martians at close range. It is feared he was lost in the recent battle. Langham Field, Virginia. Scouting planes report 3 Martian machines visible above treetops, moving north toward Somerville with population fleeing ahead of them. The heat ray is not in use, although advancing at express train speed, invaders picked their way carefully. They seem to be making a conscious effort to avoid destruction of cities and countryside. However, they stop to uproot power lines, bridges, and railroad tracks. Their apparent objective is to crush resistance, paralyze communication, and disorganize human society. Here is a bulletin from Basking Ridge, New Jersey. Coon hunters have stumbled on a second cylinder similar to the first, embedded in the great swamp 20 miles south of Morristown. Army field pieces are proceeding from Newark to blow up the second invading unit before the cylinder can be opened and the fighting machine rigged. They're taking up a position in the foothills of Watchung Mountain. Another bulletin from Langham Field, Virginia. Scouting planes report enemy machines, now 3 in number, increasing speed northward, kicking over houses and trees in their evident haste to form a conjunction with their allies south of Morristown. Machines also sighted by telephone operator east of Middlesex within 10 miles of Plainfield. Here's a bulletin from Winston-Field, Long Island. A fleet of Army bombers carrying heavy explosives flying north in pursuit of enemy. Scouting planes act as guides. They keep the speeding enemy in sight. Just a moment, please, ladies and gentlemen. We've run special wires to the artillery line and adjacent villages to give you direct reports in the zone of the advancing enemy. First, we take you to the battery of the 22nd Field Artillery, located in the Watchung Mountains.
Range 32 meters.
32 meters.
Direction 39 degrees.
39 degrees.
Fire.
140 yards to the right, sir.
Hit range 31 meters.
31 meters.
Projection 37 degrees.
37 degrees.
Fire.
Hit, sir. Got the tripod of one of them. They're stopped. The others are trying to repair it.
Quick, get the range. Shift 30 meters.
30 meters.
Projection 27 degrees.
27 degrees.
Fire.
Can't see the tail lamp, sir. Letting off a smoke.
What is it?
Black smoke, sir. Moving this way. Lying close to the ground. Moving fast.
Put on gas mask. Ready to fire. Shift to 24 meters.
24 meters.
Projection 24 degrees.
24 degrees.
Fire.
Still can't see, sir. No coming nearer. Get the range.
23 meters. 23 meters. 23 meters. 22. Please. 22. Please. Army bombing plane V-843 off Bayonne, New Jersey. Lieutenant Volt, commanding 8 bombers, reporting to Commander Fairfax, Langham Field. This is Volt reporting to Commander Fairfax, Langham Field. Enemy tripod machines now in sight. Reinforced by 3 machines from the Morristown cylinder. 6 altogether. 1 machine partially crippled. Believed hit by shell from Army gun in Watchung Mountains. Guns now appear silent. A heavy black fog hanging close to the earth of extreme density, nature unknown. No sign of heat ray. Enemy now turns east, crossing Passaic River into the Jersey marshes. Another straddles the Pulaski Skyway. Evident objective is New York City. They're pushing down a high-tension power station. Machines are close together now, and we're ready to attack. Planes circling, ready to strike. 1,000 yards and we'll be over the first. 800 yards. 600. 400. 200. There they go. The giant arm raised. Green flash. They're spraying us with flame. 2,000 feet. Engines are giving out. No chance to release bombs. Only one thing left. Drop on them, plane and all. We're diving on the first one. Now the engine's gone. 8.
This is Bayonne, New Jersey, calling Langham Field. This is Bayonne, New Jersey, calling Langham Field. Come in, please. This is Langham Field. Go ahead. 8 Army bombers in engagement with enemy tripod machines over Jersey Flats. Engines incapacitated by heat ray. All crashed. 1 enemy machine destroyed. Enemy now discharging heavy black smoke in direction of...
This is Newark, New Jersey. This is Newark, New Jersey. Warning. Poisonous black smoke pouring in from Jersey marshes. Street is South Street. Gas masks useless. Urge population to move into open spaces. Automobiles use routes 7, 23, 24. Avoid congested areas. Smoke now spreading over Raymond Boulevard.
X2L calling CQ, 2X2L calling CQ, 2X2L calling 8X3R. Come in, please.
This is 8X3R coming back at 2X2L.
How's reception? How's reception? Okay, please. Where are you, 8X3R? What's the matter? Where are you?
I'm speaking from the roof of Broadcasting Building. I'm speaking from the roof of Broadcasting Building, New York City. The bells you hear are ringing to warn the people to evacuate the city as Martians approach. Estimated in the last 2 hours, 3 million people have moved out along the roads to the north. Hutchison River Parkway is still kept open for motor traffic. Avoid bridges to Long Island, hopelessly jammed. All communication with Jersey Shore closed 10 minutes ago. No more defenses. Our army is wiped out. Artillery, Air Force, everything wiped out. This may be the last broadcast. We'll stay here to the end. People are holding service here below us in the cathedral. Now I look down the harbor, all manner of boats, overloaded with fleeing population pulling out from docks. Streets are all jammed. Noise and crowds like New Year's Eve in city. Wait a minute. The enemy is now in sight above the Palisades. Five great machines. First one is crossing the river. I can see it from here, wading the Hudson like a man wading through a brook. A bulletin is handed me. Martian cylinders are falling all over the country. One outside of Buffalo, one in Chicago, St. Louis. Seem to be timed and spaced. Now the first machine reaches the shore. He stands watching, looking over the city. Steel Cowlish head is even with the skyscrapers. He waits for the others. They rise like a line of new towers on the city's west side. Now they're lifting their metal hands. This is the end now.
Smoke comes out, black smoke drifting over the city. People in the streets see it now. They're running toward the East River, thousands of them, dropping in like rats. Now the smoke's spreading faster. It's reached Times Square. People are trying to run away from it, but it's no use. They're falling like flies. Now the smoke's crossing 6th Avenue, 5th Avenue. 100 yards away. It's 50 feet.
X2L calling CQ. 2X2L calling CQ. 2X2L calling CQ, New York. Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone? 2X2L.
You are listening to a CBS presentation of Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in an original dramatization of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The performance will continue after a brief intermission. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System. The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, starring Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air.
As I set down these notes on paper, I'm obsessed by the thought that I may be the last living man on Earth. I've been hiding in this empty house near Grover's Mill, a small island of daylight cut off by the black smoke from the rest of the world. All that happened before the arrival of these monstrous creatures in the world now seems part of another life. A life that has no continuity with the present. Furtive existence for the lonely derelict who pencils these words on the back of some astronomical notes bearing the signature of Richard Pearson. I look down at my blackened hand and I try to connect them with a professor who lives at Princeton and who, on the night of October 20th, glimpsed through his telescope an orange splash of light on a distant planet. My wife, my colleagues, my students, my books, my observatory, my world. Where are they? Did they ever exist? Am I Richard Pearson? What day is it? Do days exist without calendars? Does time pass when there are no human hands left to wind the clocks? Writing down my daily life, I tell myself I shall preserve human history between the dark covers of this little book that was meant to record the movements of the stars. But to write, I must live, and to live, I must eat. Find molded bread in the kitchen and an orange, not too spoiled to swallow. Keep watch at the window. Time to time, I catch sight of a Martian above the black smoke. Smoke still holds the house in its black coil, but at length there's a hissing sound, and suddenly I see a Martian mounted on his machine, spraying the air with a jet of steam as if to dissipate the smoke. I watch in a corner as his huge metal legs nearly brush against the house. Exhausted by terror, I fall asleep. Morning. Morning. Sun streams in the window. Black cloud of gas is lifted, and the scorched meadows to the north look as though a black snowstorm had passed over them. I venture from the house. I make my way to a road, no traffic. Here and there, a wrecked car, baggage overturned, a blackened skeleton. Push on north. For some reason, I feel safer trailing these monsters than running away from them. And I keep a careful watch. I've seen the Martians feed. Should one of their machines appear over the top of trees, I'm ready to fling myself flat on the earth. Come to a chestnut tree. October. Chestnuts are ripe. Fill my pockets. Must keep alive. 2 days I wander in a vague northerly direction through a desolate world. Finally, I notice a living creature. A small red squirrel in a beech tree. I stare at him and wonder. He stares back at me. I believe at that moment the animal and I shared the same emotion. Joy of finding another living being. Push on north. I find dead cows in a brackish field, and beyond the charred ruins of a dairy and a silo remain standing guard over the wasteland like a lighthouse, deserted by the sea. Astride the silo perches a weathercock. The arrow points north. North. Next day, I come to a city. City vaguely familiar in its contours, yet its buildings strangely dwarfed and leveled off as if a giant had sliced off its highest towers with a capricious sweep of his hand. Reached the outskirts, I found Newark. Newark, undemolished but humbled by some whim of the advancing Martians. Presently, with an odd feeling of being watched, I caught sight of something crouching in a doorway. I made a step towards it. And it rose up and became a man. A man armed with a large knife.
Stop! Where do you come from?
I come from many places. A long time ago, from Princeton.
Princeton, huh? That's near Grover's Mill.
Yes.
Grover's Mill. There's no food here. This is my country. All this end of town down the river. There's only food for one. Which way are you going?
I don't know. I guess I'm looking for people.
Hey, what was that? You hear something just then?
No. Only a bird. A live bird.
Yeah. You get to know that birds have shadows these days. Hey, we're in the open here. Let's crawl in this doorway here and talk.
Have you seen any Martians?
No. They're going over to New York. Night, the sky's alive with their lights, just as if people were still living in it. By daylight, you can't see them. 5 days ago, a couple of them carried something big across the flats from the airport. I think they're learning how to fly.
Fly?
Yeah, fly.
Then it's all over with humanity. Stranger, there's still you and I. 2 of us left.
Yeah. They got themselves in solid. They wrecked the greatest country in the world. Those green stars, they're probably falling somewhere every night. They've only lost one machine. There isn't anything to do. We're done. We're licked.
Where were you? You're in a uniform.
Yeah, what's left of it. I was in the militia. National Guard. That's good. There wasn't any war. Any more than there's war between men and ants.
Yes, but we're eatable ants. I found that out. What'll they do to us?
I thought it all out. Right now, we're caught as we're wanted. The Martian only has to go a few miles to get a crowd on the run.
But they won't keep on doing that. They'll begin catching us systematic, like keeping the best and storing us in cages and things. They haven't begun on us yet.
Not begun?
Not begun. All that's happened so far is because we don't have sense enough to keep quiet. Bothering them with guns and such stuff and losing our heads and rushing off in crowds. Now, instead of our rushing around blind, we got to fix ourselves up according to the way things are now. Cities, nations, civilization, progress.
Yes, but if that's so, what is there to live for?
Well, there won't be any more concerts for 1,000,000 years or so, and no nice little dinners at restaurants. If it's amusement you're after, I guess the game's up.
What is there left?
Life, that's what. I want to live. Yeah, and so do you. We're not going to be exterminated. And I don't mean to be caught either. Tamed and fattened and bred like an ox.
What are you going to do?
I'm going on. Right under their feet. I got a plan. We men as men, we're finished. We don't know enough. We got to learn plenty before we got a chance. We've got to live and keep free while we learn, see? I've thought it all out, see?
Well, tell me the rest.
Well, it isn't all of us that are made for wild beasts. That's what it got to. That's what it got to be. That's why I watched you. Watched you. All those little office workers that used to live in these houses. They be no good. They haven't any stuff in them. They used to run off to work. I've seen hundreds of them running to catch their commuter's train in the morning, afraid they'd get canned if they didn't. Running back at night, afraid they wouldn't be in time for dinner. Lives insured and a little invested in case of accidents. Yeah, and on Sundays, worried about the hereafter. Well, the Martians, they'll be a godsend for those guys. Nice, roomy cages, good food, careful breeding, no worries. Yeah, after a week or so of chasing around the fields on empty stomachs, they'll come and be glad to be caught.
You've thought it all out, haven't you?
Sure, you bet I have. That isn't all. These Martians are going to make pets of some. Train them to do tricks. Who knows? Get sentimental over the pet boy who grew up and had to be killed. Yeah. And some, maybe, they'll train to hunt us.
Oh, no, it's impossible.
Yes, they will. There's men who do it gladly. One of them comes after me, by...
Meantime, you and I and others like us, where are we to live when the Martians own the Earth?
I got it all figured out. To live underground. I've been thinking about the sewer. Under New York, there are miles and miles of them. The main ones, they're big enough for anybody. Then there's cellars, vaults, underground storerooms, railway tunnels, subways. You're beginning to see, huh? We'll get a bunch of strong men together. No weaklings. That rubbish, out.
As you meant me to go.
All right. Give you a chance, didn't I?
Won't quarrel about that. Go on.
Well, we got to make safe places for us to stay in, see? Get all the books we can. Science books. That's where men like you come in, see? We raid the museums. We'll even spy on the Martians. May not be so much we have to learn before... Listen. Just imagine this. 4 or 5 of their own fighting machines suddenly start off. Heat rays right and left. Not a Martian in them. Not a Martian in them, see? But men. Men who've learned the way how. May even be in our time. Gee. Imagine having one of them lovely things with its heat ray wide and free. We'd turn it on Martians. We'd turn it on men. We'd bring everybody down on their knees.
That's your plan.
Yeah. You. Me. More of us. We'd own the world.
I see.
Hey. Hey, what's the matter? Where you going?
Not to your world. Bye, stranger. Well, after parting with the artilleryman, I came at last to the Holland Tunnel, entered that silent tube, anxious to know the fate of the great city on the other side of the Hudson. Cautiously, I came out of the tunnel and made my way up Canal Street. Reached 14th Street, and there again were black powder and several bodies and an evil, ominous smell from the gratings of the cellars of some of the houses. Wandered up through the 30s and 40s. Stood alone on Times Square. Caught sight of a lean dog running down 7th Avenue with a piece of dark brown meat in his jaws and a pack of starving mongrels at his heels. Made a wide circle around me as though he feared I might prove a fresh competitor. Walked up Broadway in the direction of that strange powder, past silent shop windows, displaying their mute wares to empty sidewalks. Past the Capitol Theater, silent, dark. Past a shooting gallery where a row of empty guns faced an arrested line of wooden ducks. Near Columbus Circle, I noticed models of 1939 motor cars in the showrooms facing empty streets. Over the top of the General Motors building, I watched a flock of black birds circling in the sky. Hurried on. Suddenly, I caught sight of the hood of a Martian machine, standing somewhere in Central Park, gleaming in the late afternoon sun. An insane idea. I rushed recklessly across Columbus Circle and into the park. I climbed a small hill above the pond at 60th Street, and from there I could see, standing in a silent row along the mall, 19 of those great metal Titans, their cowls empty, their steel arms hanging listlessly by their sides. I looked in vain for the monsters that inhabit those machines. Suddenly, my eyes were attracted to the immense flock of black birds that hovered directly below me. They circled to the ground. And there before my eyes, stark and silent, lay the Martians with the hungry birds pecking and tearing brown shreds of flesh from their dead bodies. Later, when their bodies were examined in laboratories, it was found that they were killed by the putrefactive and disease bacteria against which their systems were unprepared. Slain, after all, man's defenses had failed by the humblest thing that God, His wisdom, has put upon this earth. Before the cylinder fell, there was a general persuasion that through all the deep of space, no life existed beyond the petty surface of our minute sphere. Now we see further. Dim and wonderful is the vision I've conjured up in my mind of life spreading slowly from this little seedbed of the solar system throughout the inanimate vastnesses of sidereal space. But a remote dream, maybe that the destruction of the Martians is only a reprieve to them and not to us. The future ordained, perhaps. Strange it now seems to sit in my peaceful study at Princeton, writing down this last chapter of the record, begun at a deserted farm in Grover's Mill. Strange to watch children playing in the streets. Strange to see young people strolling on the green where the new spring grass heals the last black scars of a bruised earth. Strange to watch the sightseers enter the museum where the dissembled parts of a Martian machine are kept on public view. Strange when I recall the time when I first saw it. Bright and clean cut, hard and silent under the dawn of that last great day.
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen. Out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. Starting now, we couldn't soap all your windows and steal all your garden gates. By tomorrow night, so we did the best next thing. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the CBS. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it, and that both institutions are still open for business. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch, and if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian. It's Halloween.
Tonight, the Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations coast to coast has brought you The War of the World by H.G. Wells, the 17th in its weekly series of dramatic broadcasts featuring Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air. Next week, we present a dramatization of 3 famous short stories. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Well, there we go. That is The War of the Worlds from 1938, October 30th. Mike Sauter, I have to admit something, and maybe I'm making you admit to it too. I did not listen to this in preparation because I like to hear it live on the air. Had you listened to it in prep for tonight's broadcast?
Most of it, although not all of it. So yeah, I'll be honest. Like I do get a little bogged down in the third section where it's just Orson Welles' narration for the vast majority of it, with that one brief section which turns into the post-apocalyptic version of The Warriors, where like 2 guys meet and one's like, "Hey, get off my turf."
You don't mess with the orphans.
but yeah, apart from that, I had listened to the whole thing.
Yeah. Chris, thanks so much. He's probably gone by now, but thanks, Chris, for being with us. We are so thrilled to have you guys with us because, Mike, now we've talked about the explanation of the panic that the broadcast that panicked America. We've talked about that in terms of what we were taught as we were growing up, being little kids in the 70s and the 80s. And then along comes a new narrative. And actually last year when I presented this show on a different streaming show of mine, I was favoring that one heavily, but you actually did some research. So let's talk about the new narrative and let's talk about your new narrative on top of that one.
Well, it's not just mine. I mean, there's been a lot of scholarly research over the years in both directions. But let me, I got to share my screen here to get some visual accompaniment to illustrate what I'm doing.
Class the show up a little.
Here we go. I need to. All right. So, is this?
You can put that on screen, right? Or should I put that on screen?
Yeah, I think you need to put it on screen.
Okay. Are we ready to go? Should I?
Yeah. I think so. So, for the 75th anniversary in 2013, Slate Magazine published this article that was really kind of ringing the bell for the War of the Worlds panic. The story that we've all heard was just a myth, and it wasn't what we had heard all those years. So their primary points were that the original program did not touch off the nationwide hysteria that the story tells, and almost nobody was fooled by the broadcast. And one of the reasons is newspapers seized on the opportunity presented by Wells' program to discredit radio as a source of news. Radio is still relatively young. Newspapers, news was their thing. And so when radio started doing news, they were pretty upset about it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the other points were the panic was so tiny as to be practically immeasurable on the night of the broadcast. And they also draw a firm line between listeners being just panicked, frightened, disturbed, or excited, and by being panicked, because that's the legend, is that the War of the Worlds broadcast panicked America. So I just wanted to rebut this counter myth to the original myth of the panic. So I'm going to go one by one with these. The authors of this article reason that many shows intend to frighten and excite. Obviously, if you have a really thrilling story, you may get excited, you may get frightened, but that's not panic, which is the legend. So my point in rebut to that is, in the dictionary, panic is a sudden overpowering fright or a sudden unreasoning terror, often accompanied by mass flight. And when people listen to an intense drama or a suspenseful thriller, they're not going to generally phone the police, head for the hills, or rush to their loved ones. So to me, any kind of extraordinary action like that is demonstrating panic. So with that as the baseline, going to the next point, that newspapers were seizing this opportunity to discredit radio as a source of news. The story, according to these authors in the Slate magazine article and others, was that newspapers were sensationalizing the panic as much as possible to undermine radio, to advertisers, to the FCC, the regulators in the country, that radio was irresponsible and not to be trusted. And of course, newspapers were the true source of where you can trust to get your news. But there's a thing that was going on in the 1930s. It's called the press radio war, when newspapers were battling with radio about radio's ability to deliver news. Of course, the War of the Worlds broadcast was in 1938. By that time, things were really changing. And according to a journalist, Bo Carter, in 1936, today, key newspaper publishers have switched their ground. Instead of now trying to block radio news, they're acquiring as many radio stations as they can lay their hands on. So there were a lot of radio stations that were owned by newspapers, or at least owned by the owners of the newspapers. And as a matter of fact, 1/3 or almost 1/3 of the radio stations in the US in 1937 were owned by newspapers. So things really had kind of changed since the real height of this press radio war. And so I don't know if it's credible. If you look at newspapers like the Birmingham News, they owned a radio station that when they bought it, they renamed it WSGN for the call letters, which stood for South's Greatest Newspaper. And in the Birmingham News, they reported on the story the day after the broadcast. They talked about people running to their neighbors' homes to seek refuge, just huge hysteria. Places were besieged with calls from people who heard parts of the program and believed they were true and the world were coming to an end. So according to this counter myth, newspapers were trying to undermine radio, except in this case, this newspaper was and the radio station were part of the same company. So it just doesn't seem credible to me. Another example, in Louisville, Kentucky, the Courier-Journal, they actually were early in the game, and they started a radio station in the 1920s. And here they quote a desk sergeant rather at the police department who was swamped with phone calls, and he's saying that the people who telephoned were scared to death when he talked to them. And mentioning this sergeantologist in Louisville, Kentucky, brings us to another point, which is newspapers reporting with specificity about their own community. Because if you're going to mention name names of people, then that's something that's easily falsifiable. You can check with these people, especially if they're, name people in your community. The New York Times, the day after, they got very specific and were naming people. This is Samuel Tishman of 100 Riverside Drive, so even giving his address. He declared that hundreds of persons evacuated their homes. Now, granted, New York City is not like necessarily a very small community. Samuel Tishman, maybe not necessarily very well known, but across the country, here in Pittsburgh, where I am, that happened pretty routinely. This is the Pittsburgh Press the day after, talking about the district attorney of Beaver County going to visit friends. They got a phone call saying that listen to the radio, and they just rushed home to be with their children as soon as they heard the news of that. So obviously, if that's going in the newspaper and that didn't really happen, then District Attorney McCreary probably would have had something to say about that. Another category that doesn't really fit this narrative is college newspapers. There are college newspapers. There's another one here in Pittsburgh, the Duquesne Duke of Duquesne University, and they reported about this guy Joe Yankitis, who was a player for the college basketball team, that he switched from Charlie McCarthy over to the War of the Worlds, thought it was real, started yelling for his other teammates, and in the article they also mentioned that a lot of students were scared out of their wits based on the broadcast. This is the University of Pennsylvania newspaper in Philadelphia. They had a similar story about people panicking, about getting calls from his parents telling him to leave for the West to head home, and phone lines being jammed by students who are trying to call their homes. So evidence of panic there from college newspapers that couldn't realistically be expected to care about this press radio war, especially because college students, they were kind of native to this new medium of radio. It was something that they grew up with. So unlike many editors and publishers of newspapers, this was a part of their life. So to me, it's unlikely that they were towing this sort of newspaper line against radio. The next point, the supposed panic was so tiny as to be practically immeasurable on the night of the broadcast. They cite in this article, I mentioned in the pre-broadcast before the airing of the War of the Worlds, about the Hooper ratings. C.E. Hooper, the ratings service, they telephoned 5,000 households for its survey. They would call and ask, what are you listening to right now, as opposed to some rating services that ask, what did you listen to yesterday? What did you watch last week when television came in? But they would call and ask, what are you doing right now in terms of your radio listening? Only 2% answered something that would have indicated they were listening to CBS and the War of the Worlds broadcast. So they say that's practically immeasurable. However, if you look at the numbers, 2% of homes would mean almost 700,000 households in the U.S. If you multiply that by 3.67, which was the 1940 census number for people per household, that would be over 2.5 million listeners if everyone in a household was listening. So somewhere the number of 2% is somewhere between those two. But even so, the C.E. Hooper method, they only telephone people in 26 cities across the U.S. So that limits the number of people that they were calling. And additionally, there were about 20 million telephones in use in 1938, but almost 27 million, well, let's say 26.5 million U.S. households with a radio. So about 25% of households had no phone. That number was even greater if you consider that probably a lot of those telephones, or a significant number of them, were in businesses and not in households. So even if you grant that low listening to the Mercury Theater was the case, a lot of the people, by their own admission in a lot of these articles across the country in newspapers, they weren't listening, but they still panicked because they heard about it from somebody else, and they took those extraordinary actions based on secondhand information. For example, here's the Baltimore Sun, their coverage of it. A near riot resulted in a grocery store when a girl came in and started talking about this news bulletin, and a lot of little men jumped out and began killing people, and there was a hurried exodus from the store after that. So those people wouldn't have counted as obviously listening to the broadcast. And in California, the Fresno Bee, this is a woman at a hotel, she received a call from her son, and he told her about it, and she required a physician's care. She was so upset about it. Last point, that the primary point that was made in the article, that this is basically kind of the thesis of the article, is that the program did not touch off nationwide hysteria, and almost nobody was fooled by the broadcast. But here's a book called Broadcast Hysteria. This guy, Brad Schwartz, who this was started off as his college thesis, and then he wrote a whole book from it after he graduated. Here, got my copy of it right here. He found a trove in an archive, some academic archive, that actually had letters written by individuals who were listening in the audience, who wrote to CBS or to Orson Welles directly to explain or tell or share their story about whether they were upset. Some people thought it was funny that they were fooled. Some people were like, I want you to refund money because I spent money to deal with my panic. For example, this is a letter from a New York City resident to Orson Welles the actual night of the broadcast, saying that her whole family was panic stricken. And this is a Michigan resident writing a letter also that very same night, saying that 15 minutes ago, her husband and 2 sleeping little ones were racing downtown to get the car tanked. Yes, darn you, tanked with gasoline. We were off to the open spaces after putting in a $1.50 long distance call to say goodbye to my mother. So obviously just individual listeners reporting their own stories. And it's hard to say that this did not that nobody was fooled by Welles' broadcast when you read these accounts. And the last thing I will say about this, that it was broadcast from 8 to 9 p.m. on CBS. According to Broadcasting Magazine, the NBC program at 9:30, now NBC, obviously a different network, Walter Winchell was on, and he, according to the magazine, issued a reassuring message to listeners about the situation. In local New York City radio stations, WOR delivered a quieting message during their 9 p.m. programming, and WMCA ran a denial bulletin about what, the invasion story on its 9:15 news program, 5-Star Final. So the question is, if no one was fooled and there was no panic, why were these radio stations and networks reassuring their listeners? So that is my story of, I've no doubt that things were exaggerated in the myth, the stories that newspapers might have been overblown, but to say that it didn't happen, to me, just the evidence points in a different direction, and it just doesn't. It's not believable to me. You let me know, you folks in the chat, what you think about it. But that's what I wanted to share with you.
I wasn't sure if you got to see this comment from Chris Regan.
Well,
I second that. I would love to see you do that.
That would be fun. I tell you, I do have some other anecdotes to share, but I need to have a drink of water after that monologue.
You go right there. John brings up an interesting anecdote that I have heard as well, that there was reportedly at least one suicide, and there was at least one injury that I remember where somebody like broke a leg trying to get into a moving car or something like that.
There was reports of a suicide. It's interesting. I had a number of examples from Pittsburgh, and which is where I live. It's complete coincidence. It's not like I was just, only looking at my local library archives or something like that. But there was an Associated Press wire story that said that a woman was threatening to take a bottle of pills, and she was stopped by her husband, but she was so panicked by the broadcast that she was saying, I'd rather go out this way than that. But it is true. There's one thing that in the Slate magazine article they do point out is there wasn't one verifiable suicide, even though there were reports of it happening, or serious injury. There was a lot of stories about people ending up in the hospital because of this, and there really isn't good evidence to show that. So the suicide story, it was an incident that happened in Pittsburgh and was picked up by the Associated Press. It was basically her husband telling the story, and it may have been just he was exaggerating her panic, and obviously nothing actually happened because of it. And there were stories that people told about people jumping out windows as well, but there's no evidence that happened either.
Yeah. That's fantastic, Mike. Thank you for sharing that with us. I have to say, I really do love that you were able to bring the train back. You were able to back this story up because I think it's more important that we understand the power of media than we go, you remember that story you heard, for most of your life? Yeah, it's not true, which is kind of how I feel the Slate article came off.
And, it is interesting. The myth, as we all know, sometimes, the legend is more powerful than the reality. And I do have to say that there was one consumer of the legend that is shocking and surprising. I do have some extra little tidbits it's interesting or funny. This is on the interesting category. In a weird kind of case of history's Godwin's Law, a week after the broadcast, Adolf Hitler made a reference in a speech to the War of the Worlds broadcast. He was delivering a speech in Munich in which he was talking about what was going on in the world, and he said, quote, obviously as a translation, let me assure you that the German people shall not succumb to a fear of bombs falling, let us say, from either Mars or the moon. Clearly making a reference that's 1 week later from the War of the Worlds broadcast. So obviously trying to suggest that people in the United States were not of hardy character to take this panicked approach to this broadcast. On a more humorous side, there was a church lady who was quoted in a newspaper that the panic was actually good. Mrs. Lawson of Knoxville, Tennessee, said in a newspaper interview that we had quite a bunch of young people out here who'd been trying to pull into the church especially hard. My son Leroy was one of them. That broadcast moved them, I'm telling you. 5 of them joined the church. I'm mighty happy about my son today. I was not thinking about myself. I was thinking about the sinners. I had them on my mind, and I got relief from 3 of them today. Some people are criticizing the broadcast, but I think it was the most wonderful thing that ever happened.
Wow.
So
wow. I never even imagined that. And yet I'm ashamed to admit that's how I like this story to move. I like for this story to be a what are you gonna do when the ish comes down? What where are you and how are you going to um, approach the end of your life?
Well, some people do have a quirky approach to that circumstance, and this is from the opposite end of the spectrum. As some research, CBS knew that this was going to, after the initial switchboard getting jammed with calls and all that, they knew that this was going to be something they had to be careful about. So they instantly sent 2,500 people or interviewed 2,500 people out in the field from their very new audience research department to find out more about who was listening, did people panic, that whole thing. And among the people interviewed, they later said that one man in New Jersey said that he thought that the men from Mars were really invading down around Princeton, and that was going to spare him a lot of trouble because he had falsified his books, and now he wouldn't have to worry about it. So, at peace. For different reasons.
I hate that I relate to that guy so much because it's like, oh, the Martians are here and they're destroying everything. But I promised I was going to fix, the thing that my wife wanted fixed. And oh, well, I guess I'm off the hook now.
Yep. Well, there's things I don't have to scratch off my to-do list after all.
The honey-do list goes right in the trash. Welcome, Martian overlords.
But, and again, as we can expect, Hollywood movie studios took a different approach to this, which was to see if they could cash in on it, of course. So it was Universal Studios. Earlier in 1938, they had made Flash Gordon's Trip to Mars, which was a 15-part Buster Crabbe serial. Wow. And they were already planning on doing an edit of the episodes, the 15 episodes of it, to put it into a theatrical production. But it was scheduled to come out on November 7th. So we're talking 1 week after the following weekend after the War of the Worlds broadcast, they managed to do a quick U-turn and retitle it Mars Attacks the World.
Oh my
so
gosh.
that they could cash in on the all the hype about that. And the ad copy for the movie overtly referenced the panic off the air and onto the screen. See what frightened 10 million radio listeners and terrorized the nation on a recent Sunday night. So it's the, I guess, the 1938 version of the Law and Order ripped from the headlines episodes.
That is so interesting because Flash Gordon itself was not the very first of its own ilk. We were speaking earlier in the chat about post-apocalyptic literature, and a big example of that would be Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers actually came first, and Flash Gordon was a ripoff. It was a different version of the Buck Rogers story. Buck Rogers, of course, taking place in the future, and Flash Gordon taking place when our world intersects with Mongo, with another world. Really interesting. I did not know that they were doing that science fiction on the heels of this. And let's also talk about what happened to Orson Welles after this, because I can provide one piece of information, and that is that Mercury Theater of the Air, right? Not on the air.
You know what? I've been confused about that for years, and I've seen it both ways. Howard Koch in his book writes on the air. All the newspapers, or most of the newspapers that I've seen at the time, said of the air. So I think it was probably both.
Yes. I want to answer this one for Left-Handed Jedi. Yes. That is, oh my gosh, I have it. It's, oh my gosh, I have it right over there in my,
you told me
DVD.
about this one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, Commando Cody, King of the Rocketmen. And, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I'm running the show. I can't run over and find that, but maybe somebody could look it up for me. But yes, that kind of sci-fi, I think we can draw a straight line back to War of the Worlds. With that being, yeah, Chris backs me up on this. It's Commando Cody. And I think actually in that serial was yes, we do. We base Retro Rangers on Commando Cody. That serial also had George Reeves playing a man from Mars. I'm sorry, a moon man. But what happened to the show of Mercury Theater on the Air, we'll say, was that they got a sponsor, Campbell Soup, and they became the Campbell Soup Playhouse. And the show didn't change all that much. It was still pretty much Orson Welles' show, doing literature and a lot of like historical fiction and fanciful fiction. They did Sherlock Holmes, in which Orson Welles plays Professor Moriarty. They did Dracula. They did some really big, fun stories. They're an hour long, so I don't tend to play them a lot because honestly, they're very overwritten. But it became a bigger show. And of course, Wells' career kept going up.
Which is interesting because it was really touch and go for a little while. In the days and even weeks after the War of the Worlds broadcast, the public and influential people across the country couldn't quite decide whether this was a good thing or a bad thing that happened, whether they were heroes or villains, or Wells, particularly since he was the public face of it all. There was an influential newspaper columnist who published a column not too long after the broadcast that said that Orson Welles was a national hero for exposing the unreadiness of the American people in the face of what was happening over in Europe, and that we as a country need to figure things out and get our populace prepared for what might be coming. And that kind of helped to turn the tide for everybody saying, yes, I guess it was a good thing. He's not a villain, he's a hero. And that, he, of course, ended up not too long after going to Hollywood and doing Citizen Kane, and ended up in the same kind of controversies in a way. It's just um, his lack of care of what the results of what he wanted to do ended up being very giving him a lot of headaches and kind of damaging his subsequent career after that. But he, it was definitely a big career move for him. And Howard Koch, the writer, he, after his 6 months of service at writing 60-page scripts week in, week out, for this under very demanding circumstances, he got hired not too long afterwards to take a couple of half-finished scripts and finish them for his first Hollywood feature, which was Casablanca.
Little movie called Casablanca.
Yeah. Oh, by the way. Oh, one PS to the story about Universal turning the Flash Gordon serial into a cash-in feature film. There is an interesting thing in the Springfield Daily News, the local movie theater that was showing this Mars Attacks the World Flash Gordon story. I think they were trying to go for, anytime there's a lot of controversy, it happens today. I mean, and the internet is practically based on this now, is that everybody was like, ooh, they got attention. I want attention too. So I think this was an attempt to try to generate a little panic amongst the public. But the local theater in Springfield, Ohio, they were opening Mars Attacks the World. And so what they did was they bought, newspapers, there's always little spaces that they, stories they need to fill with something. And back in the old days, in 1938, certainly, sometimes they would just have like little inspirational quotes or things like that to fill. But they could, if someone wanted to put a one-line ad in, they would certainly take the money for that. So this particular theater, the Fairbanks Theater in Springfield, obviously thought they could generate some buzz for the movie because they bought one-line ads all throughout the newspaper on many pages throughout the paper that just said, Mars attacks the world today. And then it just said dash ADV period to indicate that it was advertising.
Oh my
But
God.
if you're flipping through the newspaper and you see Mars attacks the world today, that is, that's something that's going to catch your attention. But obviously, didn't do much for them, I guess.
There was a replay of this in Buffalo, New York. Was this in the early 70s? Do you have details?
I believe so. Yeah, there was and I think they did it. They did it in Buffalo. They didn't inspire panic that I remember, or did they?
My hearing of it was that there were phone calls, that there was some, and you have to know that they wanted that, like they were hoping for that. So they probably did the same thing that Wells originally did, and they didn't do enough references to, you're listening to WBLS or whatever the station was up there. I had heard that there was a kerfuffle, but not a panic.
Yeah, and it's been done. It's been done a number of times, but the problem with it is that people are generally aware of the story now.
Yeah.
And also the style that it was originally done in that inspired the panic. So when you start to hear that, that even if you localize it with your local university instead of Princeton and, various locations throughout your area, it's just not, people aren't going to treat it the same way that they did in 1938. However, if you might recall, in the 1980s, there was a TV movie called Special Bulletin, which was about a terrorist attack and it was done in a sort of a verite style about a TV news crew filming things that were happening. And there was such a fear. I don't remember the network that it was on, but there was such a fear that it was going to cause a War of the Worlds type of situation that they made sure, like, to run crawls and, have chyrons all throughout it saying, this is just a dramatization. This is not real, which, I'm sure for the director or the creative team, it's kind of a buzzkill to have somebody undermining your, trying to get people to accept the reality of your, at least the internal reality of your narrative.
Yeah, it's funny because there was a time, and I think we all lived through it as kids, where the disclaimer became, part of the story, and the disclaimers were a big thing now. I don't recall that happening much in the late 60s when I was a little kid, but like in the 70s and the 80s, in the times when people were concerned, that happened a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Left-Handed Jedi says, Jeff Wayne did a great musical version of War of the Worlds back in the day. Oh, my God. With Richard Burton as the narrator. Oh, I got to try to find a recording of that. That sounds amazing. Yeah, there have been stories about nuclear terrorists and stories about aliens. There, of course, was that story. I don't have the details in front of me, but it was from the BBC, and it happened in the mid-20s. That there was a radio drama about people attacking the government. Something about the barricades, rising on the barricades.
I know the one you mean, but I can't think of it either.
I've looked for a copy. No copy exists, so I kind of moved on from that. We should wrap this up. Look at us, almost 7 minutes past 2 hours. What a great show. I love doing this for Halloween. This is exactly the kind of Halloween tradition I have always loved. Let's all listen to something that frightened people, pretty much 90 years ago. It still lives in our minds. Let's close this out with a little, because people have been talking about it in the chat, a little musing from you, Mr. Sauter, if you have any, on the nature of social media and fake news and how news is dispersed nowadays. Is this a warning for us? Is this an example? What do you think?
I think, one of the things you could say, the War of the Worlds has kind of become, or it always was, almost like a Rorschach test for people who want to explain what it all means. Because for some people, especially at the time, it was about, the fear of war in Europe. Some people, it was about the nascent radio medium and how people were not fully comfortable with the power of radio. Over the years, it's been twisted into also meaning all sorts of things. I think it is an example of how easy it is to make people think something is real, which is something in today's age is very relevant because as we see on social media, there's just tons of disinformation and misinformation that's out there, from politics to health news to even just local events that take place in various communities. And it is very challenging to try to make it, to try to prevent that from happening.
I agree. And I had a little oh my God, Jerry
Springer.
I had a little Jerry Springer moment in my head where I was like, here's the thing. I feel like history is all stories anyway. How do I know what happened in, the early 1800s? How do I know what happened in 1776 or what happened in Europe in the 1500s? Because someone shared the stories with me. Sometimes it's from a textbook. Sometimes it's from a movie. Sometimes it's from fiction. Sometimes it's very definitely well-researched fact. Sometimes it's legend. All we know is what we're told. And I feel like that can really work against us sometimes.
I will. I understand what you're saying there, but the one thing I would say, being as someone who loves to research these kinds of things, always, if you're sharing information, cite your sources. Always, if you're receiving information, find out where the sources are, because you are more likely to believe something incorrect when it is there's no transparency into where the information is coming from.
Yeah. Folks, I hope you will join me next week, regular time here, 7 p.m. Next Thursday night, because we will be doing a Sherlock Holmes show. This one is going to be kind of timely. We'll be a couple of days. We'll be on the 7th, but November 5th, of course, is when Guy Fawkes is discussed, celebrated in England. So I'll be playing for you a very old but glorious, like terrific Sherlock Holmes episode. And here's my teaser for you. This Sherlock Holmes, you've never heard him before. You're going to love this guy. He's great, but he's not a Sherlock Holmes that you have ever heard before. I'm kind of sure you've never heard it. Maybe some of my radio folks know that better. If you are available this weekend at 5 p.m. on Saturday, we are debuting Joe Townsel's Dread Time Stories. Our good friend Joe Townsell, horror writer and science fiction writer, will be doing a live reading. And it will be of his story Family Unit, which is from his upcoming book. So this is a huge premiere, both of the show and of the story. And I have heard it. And let me tell you something. It is creepy. It is so creepy. And then on Sunday, the aforementioned Retro Rangers, Barry Corbin, I don't know if you're still in the... Chris, he wasn't Guy Fawkesing around. It's a family show. I'm really, yeah, I know, but we love bad jokes here. Bad jokes have a home here. Barry the K. Corbin will be joining me and Joe for Retro Rangers. We're going to do a watch party of the 3rd edition of Battle of the Retro Stars. I'm sorry, Battle of the Network Stars. Ours is called Battle of the Retro Stars. And if you want to see the Battle of the TNA, really hot bodies doing sports, it'll be fun. We always have a blast watching it together. So I hope you'll join us for that as well. It's a very popular thing when we watch Battle of the Network Stars. Because honestly, who doesn't want to hang out with their friends and just get crazy horny? And Raphael, it is not Tom Conway, who was an excellent radio Sherlock Holmes. It's not Tom Conway. It's a different Sherlock Holmes. He is so good too. It's this one's going to be great. So one more time. Next week, 7 p.m. here on Mr. Weber's Web-O Mystery. No, John, I do not believe that John Davidson and Kathy Lee Crosby are hosting this one. I think we're still with Howard Cosell. And honestly, Mike, I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but I look back on Howard Cosell now. I hear him now. He was really good.
Well, it was the era of like the unusual sports guy. Like there was a lot of people who came out of print and managed to make it in broadcasting, so they didn't have like the smooth tones as you hear with just about everybody who does sports broadcasting now. And so those quirky people from back in the day are awesome.
Folks, thank you for giving us 2 hours plus almost 15 minutes of your life. What a great time it was. I gotta turn this down just a little bit more. Mike Sauter, thank you so much for being our guest on this show and bringing your fantastic facts and presentation.
Always a pleasure.
And folks, hope to see you next week. Hope to see you on this weekend if you got some time. They're both 5 p.m. shows on the weekend. But of course, next Thursday, 7 p.m. for this show. And, oh, writing for Soupy Sales. Come on. That's amazing. All right. Thank you again, Mike. Thanks, everybody, for watching. That's it for us. Good night. Here, let me get Mike out of here first.
Mr. Weber's Web, oh, mystery, oh, oh, oh. Mr. Weber's Web, oh, mystery, ooh, ooh, ah. Mr. Weber's Web, oh, mystery, ooh, oh, 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 oh. Mr. Weber's Web, oh, mystery, ooh, ooh, ah. Mr. Weber's Web, oh, mystery, ooh, oh, 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 oh.